Hello.
Oh my God, you're there.
I
And I'm
was
here,
over
right?
here.
Am I here?
Yeah, I was over here enjoying a little bit of electronic dance music.
I was vibing a little bit with the music tonight, although it's so weird how it goes from like one kind of music to the next in just a few minutes.
We were listening to the running playlist, I believe.
We went
It's
from like a
usually
nice, pleasant kind of elevator music to like workout, techno kind. I don't know.
yeah, yeah, that's how these playlists work. Um,
H- How are
yeah,
you
it's either
feeling?
um
Are you
I'm
tired?
feeling I'm feeling good. I'm a little tired.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm tired and I have come back from Pennsylvania with an illness.
Yeah,
Yay.
yeah, yeah.
But so much fun. It was so much fun.
It really was.
And we did a lot of stuff.
We did.
And
Yeah.
it's funny because I normally don't like things that are kind of scheduled back to back to back to back, but I didn't feel super rushed, even though we
Yeah,
did a lot of things.
I think it was low key. It was like low key back to back. If
Yeah,
that's a thing.
so for those that don't know what the schedule was, we on our way to Pennsylvania, we stopped at the Chester County History Center to look at exhibit of signature quilts. And we found other very interesting goodies there. If you
Mhm.
ever have the opportunity to go somewhere that has visible storage, oh, the
Five
goodies you
thumbs
can find.
up.
Yeah, the goodies you can find in visible storage. It was hysterical because they were just these big like file cabinets that say like open me, and we're opening and we start gasping. We were so loud. We were so loud. We were like obnoxious, but like we open it and we all go, and it was awesome and funny because we're like, wow, who's gonna come in here and be like, what the hell's wrong with these ladies? Um,
Well, and it was three of us. It wasn't just you and
mhm,
I. It was our dear friend Ann Hermes was with us as well. And
mhm.
yeah.
Um,
The trio of gasps that just kept happening was
yeah, it
pretty
was
funny.
it was it was a lot. So we went there. We had some really awesome food too while we were out and about. I don't think we had one bad meal. Some were better than others, but I don't think we had a bad one.
Mhm. Yeah,
Um,
no, it's all good.
we also went to the Mennonite Life Museum, which we had found out about while reading Anne's Patrick Pillowcase's book. Our
Yeah.
friend Barb Garrett met us there. We hung out there for a while. Then we went and had lunch and had the most incredible sandwich I've ever had in my life. Then we also did a little antiquing because you can't go to Pennsylvania. Well, for me, I can't go anywhere without sneaking in an antique shop. And we were all pretty fruitful in our
Yeah.
findings.
Hmm.
Um, and then we went to Barb Garrett's quilt turning in Pennsburg, which is the Schwenkfelder, which is where Stephanie and I go to the Penn Dry Goods show every end of May, beginning of June, around there. And then we finally did our feed sack experiments that we have been talking about and tried to do at one point, just didn't plan out our timeline very well. We did that. I grabbed a ton of photos and video and things, and we still have some plans for doing a little extra with that. It did not turn out the way that anyone thinks it should have, so just hold
Yeah.
yourself.
Yeah.
Stephanie taught me to English paper piece.
I've 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 tricked another person into the fold of hand sewing.
Oh yeah, yeah. And we also did a stream on Sunday where we did an unboxing of that box under the bed lot that I won at a QSG seminar. It was interesting. Go back and watch that live stream. We show some other things, like some pictures from our murder house, the Airbnb we stayed at.
A murder
And
house.
after we were done with that and learned, the names of the players in that box and who owned it and the people they were involved in, Stephanie got on her computer with her genealogy stuff and in 10 minutes could piece together the entire life story of this person and has an update.
Yeah, so well, I don't have her whole life story, but
It's
the
more than I
wonderful
could have found.
the wonderful thing about all of these little bits of ephemera in this box, in addition to all the quilty stuff, the patterns and stuff, and magazine and newspaper clippings, were a bunch of letters from her youth. And I figured out that she was like 19 or 20. And most of these letters were written to her. And based on the content of the letters, it's clear she was writing back. These were all from young gentlemen. And there was a particular one, Charlie Unger. Our box under the bed lady was named Marjorie Fitch. And Charles was quite enamored, very smitten with Marjorie. And I'm really surprised that she saved his letters because I read them in detail after we did the stream. I was kind of paraphrasing as we were going through just to, make it quick. And he got a little pushy at the end, the last letter that at least that was in there. So there could have been more letters. I don't know. But we kind of wondered, did Marjorie end up with Charles? No, she did not. Charles was a bachelor until his 30s, I think, when he got married. And he did have one child named Gerard, who actually passed away, I think, about 10 years ago or so. It's amazing the things that'll just pop right up on Ancestry. Marjorie, sadly, got married, and her husband died 6 months after they got married, and she never remarried. She moved back in with her parents, then her father died, and she and her mother lived together for the rest of, her mother's life. And then she died. She lived pretty long. I want to say she lived until 80 or 90. I can't remember. I don't have it written down, but yeah. And she is, I mean, many years went by after her husband died, but and they were only married for 6 months, but they are buried together in the same cemetery in right outside of Cooperstown, New York.
Did you ever find out how he died?
I didn't. So every now and then you'll luck into a state that you can get the death certificates and you can find out a cause of death. But a lot of states just have like, it's kind of like the sort of like the entry, like, his death certificate was entered on this date and this is the date and that's it.
So you'd have to
So
go and do deeper digging to find that.
yeah, like probably literally go to the state archives. And Maryland is the same way for some years. And I mean, I certainly have done that traveling to the state archives for my own like, deep research. Dr. Dunton, I had to go to the state archives to get some data on him. But yeah, I love Marjorie, but I don't think I'm gonna go check in on how her husband died. I mean, you know what? If I'm in New York at some point in Albany, who knows? But her husband's name was Harold Mallory.
I wonder if our friend Molly could somehow gain access to some of that. I'm only
Molly,
curious
find
just
out how
'cause,
Harold died.
yeah, I'm only curious just because like he died within 6 months. Like unless she married
Mhm.
him knowing he was terminally ill, I'm just curious, like
Well,
tragic accident at work,
what's interesting?
tuberculosis.
Yeah, well, what's interesting is, they lived in the Cooperstown area. Apparently in her youth, maybe she was going to college because she was in Albany, but then they were married in Cooperstown. He died in Manhattan.
Hmm.
So I don't know, if he just happened to be in the city and like, yeah, it could have been a tragic accident, like, he get hit by a car, something like that. Who knows?
Hmm. Well, before we get too deep into anything else, um, I've got to give the assignment for next week. So for October 29th, we're going to be reading pages 68 through 101. Yeah, that's right. For a second, I was like, that sounds like a lot, but
Thank
I'm
goodness I stopped where I was supposed to.
I'm sure it's a crap ton of photos, and that's why. Yeah, yeah, it's a lot of photos. Okay, so that's what we're doing there. Don't worry, it'll be posted on the social medias and stuff like that. And Jennifer, it's funny. I wish obituaries said cause of death, and they often don't. And it's
Um, I
annoying.
did I did look up his name. I didn't do like an advanced search, but I did look up by his name in newspapers.com for an obituary, and I didn't find one. So,
Mm.
when I have some extra time, I'll check into Harold and see what happened. I mean, it's sad. I mean, can you imagine being married for 6 months and losing your spouse, and then, she remained a widow the rest of her life?
Yeah.
It would be kind of interesting though if something really scandalous happened, like I don't know, you got
Mhm.
mixed up with the New York City mob or something. I don't
Well, and
know.
remember, the whole reason you were really like really wanted to look is because you wanted to find out if she ended up with Charles.
Yes,
And
I did. I
then
was, yeah,
after reading the letters more thoroughly, you were like, "Oh, I hope she didn't end up with Charles.
yeah,
He's kind of a jerk."
yeah. Charles was kind of a creep. He got very like in the beginning. He was like, "Oh, my dearest," he said things like, "Uh, come on down here to New York City, and I'll show you what it means to have a good time." Creeper. But yeah, he got a little like she apparently had an illness. She had some kind of illness at the end of 1920 or no, 1919. Yeah, 1919. She had some kind of illness. She ended up in the hospital. And he got like real snotty with her, like, "I've written you, why haven't you written me back? Write back immediately." And it's like, dude, I'm sick, maybe, or maybe I don't want to talk to you anymore. Take a hint.
Yeah. Well,
So, shall we look at To Honor and Comfort?
we shall talk about all the star quilts.
Yeah,
I
there's a
mean,
lot of star quilts here.
and I mean, we're even starting off our section here with a really awesome one.
Hmm.
Like, I
Yes,
love me a star
yes.
quilt.
This one is really, really beautiful. They all are. I mean, I know in terms of the technical challenges of making a Lone Star are vast because, you got points to deal with and you've
Hmm.
got diamonds that depending, and I'm actually the little project I'm working on right now, our friend Dawn released a sewing roll project, and it uses English paper piecing, but they're little diamonds.
Hmm.
And if you turn a diamond the wrong way, you know it's gonna mess up the whole thing. Like I've literally had to rip stitches out because I'm like, oh man, I turned it the wrong way. And I know a Lone Star is identical. It's the same
Hmm.
thing. If you can't turn those strips the wrong way, it just won't work out. So these are amazing, and this one in particular is really, really stunning. Um, Now the beginning here, it's talking about quilt patterns and other design traditions. Remember last week there was the piece in there about basket makers becoming, being good quilters. And I was kind of like, why? Is it because, working with their hands, or is it because of patterns? And here though, where it's saying like adapting beadwork, rug weaving patterns and basket weaving patterns, that makes a lot of sense to me.
Hmm.
That you visualize in this kind of these traditional designs, and you can then apply that to a quilt, and I think that's pretty obvious in this section that we've read.
Hmm.
um and then I also like where it says it's sort of down on the bottom of this little section about how and of course, so when was this book written? Like in the 90s, I think 97. It says today Creek women use traditional quilting patterns, but some are beginning to incorporate traditional motifs.
Hmm.
And I think that's really cool. You know, we kind of talked about, the colonialism and certainly there are indigenous folks today that are kind of pushing away these, for all intents and purposes, like missionary type of crafts that were forced upon them, and kind of pushing that away. But in reading this section, I also see the significance that quilts, even though they're not part of a long ancient tradition for indigenous people, the symbolism and meaning that they've taken on. And I think
Hmm.
that it really blows me away, this section. We'll get to talk about some of it. Um,
I thought you in particular would be drawn to the quilt on page 34
Ah,
since
yes, the
it's made
bandanas.
with handkerchiefs. And it's
Uh-huh.
funny, we had seen a couple of quilts this past weekend made of handkerchiefs, and stuff seemed extra drawn to handkerchiefs in antique stores and things. And I was like, what a
Yeah.
small world. That always seems to be
Hmm.
how things happen
Hmm.
for us as we talk about it. And there it is over there.
Yeah, and I can never remember the name of that, like whatever that effect is. It's like when you suddenly become cognizant of something and then it's everywhere, and it's just that it's always been there. It's just you weren't paying attention until you were paying attention, right? I did experience that though. Like I'm seeing a lot of stuff made with handkerchiefs and bandanas and things, commemorative stuff. But bicentennial specifically because I'm studying bicentennial quilts and just bicentennial objects keep coming up in my searches. When we were in the antique stores, not that there was tons of bicentennial stuff, and certainly there was nothing quilt or textile related really, but I did notice, like those booths that would have like lots of glassware and like mid-century like stuff.
Mhm.
I saw some bicentennial like juice glasses. And like and that, all of us they're like a beam comes out of them now because I never would have paid any attention before, but now because I'm looking from it, it's like ding, it's got neon lights around it. Bicentennial, bicentennial.
Well, and it's also like my algorithm seems to have picked up your Eagle stuff because now I'm
Well,
constantly being shown Eagle stuff that I'm sending you.
well, you do send me a lot of Eagle stuff, so and Jen's been sending me some cool bicentennial and Eagle stuff, so her algorithm's probably starting to look a little eagle-ish.
Yeah, I just scroll and they're Eagle, Eagle, Eagle. The nice thing is though is the algorithm really helps you do research by making your friends unknowingly do research and sending you stuff. So I mean, it's like a herding effect for
Hmm.
like doing research and stuff. So like I'm all for it.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah, even Jen said lots of eagles. We're a whole flock now.
Well, and the thing is, I mean, I noticed eagle quilts because I mean that's what has drawn me to eagle quilts is just noticing them. And
Hmm.
I mean, we're gonna see them here in this book. Um, but like it was like when I really honed in and said, I'm gonna start collecting images and if I can collect quilts or in some cases quilt kits. Um, and yeah, like all of a sudden they're everywhere, you know. And in places where they're patriotic or they're culturally significant, but also just random eagles. Like
I feel like it's an episode of like Oprah when they're giving out gifts and you get an eagle and you get an eagle
you
and
get an
you
eagle.
get an eagle.
There's an eagle for everybody. Yeah.
Flipping through
So,
here is another, so it's funny, like I know some people might say like, oh, star quilts, like everybody makes star quilts, and oh, like what's so special like for them, about a star quilt. Not everybody makes star quilts like these.
no, and
These
in
are
fact,
some
this, yeah,
very unique star quilts, and the
yes,
planning that you have to do in order to
yes.
make um some of these designs.
Well, exactly. And again, when you're talking about things that have, you know, geometrically have a particular way of fitting in there and then applying different colors and designs. And I know we're gonna get to some that I've bookmarked in here that were just like, oh my gosh, that's so cool. But before we get there, let's see, what is this page 36? The strawberries and flowers quilt,
Hmm.
this
Hmm.
large, um, at first glance, like if you just like real quick look at it, it's certainly got that, yeah, it's got that like, very traditional, we looked at a lot of stuff like this weekend,
Hmm.
in the Pennsylvania Dutch area that's kind of like this. And I think there are other traditional quilts, you might see this sometimes in album quilts, where you've got some kind of floral sort of big motif. I love this one because this one is specific to the strawberries. And I think I mentioned last week that I didn't know that strawberries have such a significance in this one particular tribal culture.
Hmm.
And I love that because strawberries are, I think I said like, no offense to the corn beans, etc. But strawberries are so happy, and I just thought this was really, really neat the way that they had designed this. And then in the very center of that flower, I don't know if you noticed, it's like a little medicine wheel.
Hmm. I
I
actually
thought
only
that was
just
so cool.
noticed it now. I didn't notice it earlier.
Yeah, yeah, very cool. So stars, stars, stars.
Well, and it's funny, actually, right? I have to say, like, a little bit of a constructive criticism is this first really massive chapter. I'm not in love with its layout because we seem to do quite a bit of jumping around. Um,
Yeah.
and
I also found some editorial oversights.
oh yes, no, I did too. Some pretty big ones too, like putting
Yeah,
whole
yeah,
halves of sentences twice.
yeah.
But anywho, before we get back into the stars, like just on page 38 here, we make a diversion into Hawaiian quilt patterns.
Right,
Um,
yeah.
and I do have to say that I am semi-familiar with Hawaiian quilting, but not overly familiar. So I was pleased. Um,
Mhm.
and I did not know that traditionally Hawaiian quilt patterns were only shared with family,
Mhm.
and that you could use them to trace your family back.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought
I
that
did
was
not know
pretty
that.
pretty neat. Yeah. There also, and she doesn't really talk about it here because she does say like you don't use other people's patterns without their permission.
Hmm.
That is true.
Hmm.
But what I have taken a class, an online class in Hawaiian quilting. I made a very small piece. It's very small. And I got to tell you, Hawaiian quilts, not easy. It looks like it's like, oh yeah, just cut out a paper snowflake kind of thing, and then you just spread it out. Oh my gosh. Just doing something this big was challenging, to cut all that out and then spread it out and get
With all
it.
the detail too. It's so much
Yeah.
detail.
Yeah. And that's the thing. The one I did was like not super detailed. And the ones in this book are just like, wow. In fact, one I think in a couple pages I'm just in love with. And I was like, holy Moses, the skill it takes to, I mean, not you haven't even started sewing yet. And
Hmm.
the skill it takes to cut and then lay it out, it is a huge, huge job. Um, but there is all, and maybe it's a more of a modern tradition. But there was a man in Hawaii who, I mean, lived to be quite elderly, and he designed for people. And so, people would come to him and say, I want, I want to make a quilt and I want this design to be kind of like this. And he would design it for them.
Hmm.
And, I think he put a lot of his own artistic flair into it. So it was kind of like one of those things like they didn't know exactly what they were going to get, but it was going to be good. And so there's that, that is something that, and that was not apocryphal. It was definitely heard it from the mouths of Hawaiian people.
Hmm.
So, I think that may be something, that we're gonna get to in this book, or maybe something that Marsha MacDowell and Kurt Dewhurst did not hear in their research.
Well, and luckily we do know, I think I have at least one, that there are other books on just specifically Hawaiian quilting,
Mhm.
like historical books.
Yep.
Um, but also it's funny that you mention this person that would create patterns, is the other thing that's mentioned in here is whoever owns the quilt is the one that owns the pattern at the time.
Yeah.
I think that's also
It's
very
yeah,
interesting.
and it's such an interesting, I mean, it's like a copyright,
Hmm.
essentially. It's
Hmm.
really it's an
Where the
interesting
quilt
like
itself is
concept.
serving.
Mhm.
Yeah, and
Yep.
it says like in order to copy, you must have permission of the owner, and in order to not have it considered like copying, you have to significantly change a
Hmm.
pattern to be yours.
Right. Like not just the color, but to
Hmm.
make a change to it.
Hmm.
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting. Also, before we get too far into this, the origin story of Hawaiian quilting I thought was so cool
Hmm.
about piece of cloth out to dry and the sun casting the shadow of the tree. And it's interesting, they say it's the shadow of the breadfruit, possibly the breadfruit tree, which is what you start, like that's your first quilt is the breadfruit pattern.
Hmm.
And I noticed that they say in here like public domain patterns, but I think that I definitely in the class I took, somebody specifically drew that pattern for the class. But the breadfruit, it's a fairly simple, I'm using finger quotes here, simple, because it's still difficult. But it's kind of large, kind of circular bulb shapes. And
Not as much detail.
yeah, it's not super intricate little detail. And yeah, I mean it's a really satisfying project, but I mean, some of these like the very large, king size quilts, I can't even imagine how long it takes some of these quilters to do that. And I mean, it's a
If I
lot of
was
work.
making something like that to applicate it down, I would be just my luck that like I would be like, oh my God, I'm done. And then it turns out I forgot to applicate down like a quarter of the thing. That would be just my luck. But like what's funny, when we're speaking of like the intricacies here, like look at this quill.
This is the one that I am in love with. I'm absolutely in love with that quilt. As I was paging through, I actually had that one already flagged from the when I first got the book and read
Hmm.
through it. I looked at the pictures. I didn't actually read, and it's just so pretty. And it's not, I don't think anything like this the flora in here is not Hawaiian, like native Hawaiian stuff necessarily. Um, but it's just so, I don't know. I mean, it's like a garland of flowers, and then, that's in the center. It just looks like, I mean, it's just so pretty. Um,
And I also
and
find it
that's
interesting. I wonder if because they tend to do all their quilting in just like an echo quilting,
mhm.
which would be considered somewhat simple compared to the piecing motif, and I wonder if that's kind of on purpose. I don't claim to know the reason why, but I'm just like,
Well, I do know they said in here, where does she say in here about, she did say something about the idea of the echo. Oh, the echo or contour design. I think that there's a lot of, not necessarily symbolism, but there's the kappa
mhm.
craftsmanship that, they were using kappa as blankets. And there's some really cool stuff about kappa. I won't get into it, but I think that there's patterning on kappa and the way that you make kappa that I think it impacted quilting like to some degree. And I think that might be where some of the like, the simple echo quilting might come from.
Yeah, the little bit here that I noted was most Hawaiian quilts are quilted in echo quilting, known as, I might not say this correctly, Kuiki Maka Moina, which translates to quilting in matte weave design.
Hmm. Yeah, Kuiki Lao is the echo or contour quilting. But yeah, this is all coming from the the tradition of making kappa
Mm-hmm.
that then they could apply some of that symbolism or that experience to quilting. The other thing, and you already mentioned it, the fact that patterns are passed within families. I liked where this quote from, I think it's Sharon Balai, she calls it like it's almost like a family crest. And I was
Mm-hmm.
like, oh yeah, like I could see how it would operate that way. I thought that was really neat.
Do you happen to know? Because I don't like, is there a significance to why they're not square with like square corners? Why it's a rounded corner?
Um, I think that just happens to be that quilt
All
because
the ones in here seem to be somewhat rounded.
really?
Yep.
Oh, yeah, I guess so. I see the sex one.
Mhm. I wasn't sure if there was like a significance, which I mean, who knows? Maybe they say something later, but
Yeah, no, maybe. I don't know. I know the quilts that I saw when I was taking that class. I don't remember particularly that they were rounded on the corners like that, but
hmm
um so let's see, page 42. Back to some stars. So the headdress and the bison, ah, is that not cool?
hmm
To work those into the stars. And I mean, really, the way that they did, the maker did the headdress one, um, getting those stars within each of the points. I mean, they're kind of wonky, but it's because of the way the diamonds line up,
hmm
you know, and they get sort of wonky. But I glanced at the one with the buffalo, and then I was like, oh my gosh, that's a buffalo. I mean, how neat to get those symbols in there, you know?
Yeah, and again the planning.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah, yeah, because you make a Lone Star in quarters,
hmm
right? So you'd have to like from that center point, the you'd end up cutting the buffalo's head into quarters in
hmm
the planning of it, and then same thing with the headdress. And so, it's almost like a puzzle then to make sure that, you've got it all lined up there.
hmm
Yeah, I agree, Jen. The headdress is like so cool. Um, yeah. I mean, like, and how I would not have necessarily thought of that, to put an image in there. I mean, we've looked at like the cross stitch quilts or the little pixelated quilts where they make, and or, making baskets and, sprays of flowers and garlands and things all out of little squares.
hmm
But doing the same kind of concept with the diamonds, like I that just would have never occurred to me. And when I look at Lone Stars, I just think of the radiant in the color, and that's
Yep.
kind of it.
Yep.
So,
I think it's
yeah.
because we're so conditioned geographically to think about stars like Pennsylvania Dutch make.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, and we saw a couple this week, this
hmm
weekend. Yeah.
hmm hmm
Um, so on the next page, 43 and then into 44, they're talking about using quilts as bedrolls,
hmm
and they describe them as their sugans,
hmm
made of patched denims or other sturdy material. I immediately thought, and I don't know if you've ever heard of these, but in Australia, they have a thing called waggas, and they're basically like, again, just hard wearing, like this is all we have to make a quilt out of. I mean, literally like burlap sacks kind of stuff. That's what that reminded me of just like throw something together with what you've got, like that's sort of subsistence quilting.
hmm
And it's really just for keeping warm or just for, a mat to lay on or whatever. And it's interesting to me just to think that, of course, there's the tradition of Depression era quilting and, the pioneers, needing quilts for a variety of reasons. And it was like nobody cares what they look like, right?
hmm
they just need to serve their purpose. But for that to happen in so many different places, where people recognize that this form of textile manipulation can be, it doesn't have to be pretty. It just has to serve a purpose.
Jumping
Jen says it's
into
hard to get a Lone Star to lay flat. Yeah.
I wouldn't
Again,
know
why I've never finished one.
personally having never made one, but I do know having seen them have a hard time laying flat.
I know that if you really don't try hard enough, all of your points go weird. And it doesn't look like a star anymore. Another thing on page 44, it says when quilts were not in use, they were generally stored between mattresses.
So that
That's
blew
brilliant.
my mind.
That's brilliant
I
because,
literally I literally made that reference too at the top of my page here because what a way to make sure that they lay flat. And I wonder, like, is that why some quilts you can't like put a fold line in them even if you tried? Like there are some quilts where the fibers literally will not fold no matter how much folding you do to it. And half of me is like, have they lived their life? like in between a mattress, and like their fold line literally is straight. Because
Hmm.
not only are they held between a mattress, but they've got weight on them.
Uh-huh.
I don't know. But
Yeah,
how?
and I mean, yeah, I mean, I could see between mattresses could, if it is folded, like say it's just folded in half lengthwise or something to go under a narrow bed. Um, I could see like that fold line is
Sure.
going to be like forever because of the weight, but also there's no friction on the quilt necessarily, and especially if you've got a stack of them under there. It's kind of a brilliant, storage solution because if you've got to fold up all the quilts and stack them somewhere, that takes up space. And they did
Yes.
say something about like putting them up in the rafters, but
Yeah. Well, and from
yeah,
the
but
sounds
yeah.
of it too, these people potentially had a lot of quilts. When
Yeah, we're gonna get to
I
that.
kind of started to take somewhat of a running tally of the reasons why people would give or receive star quilts. It is by no means exhaustive. I just kept being like, oh, and there's one. Oh, and there's one. So if
Hmm.
a person could be wrapped in one if they're on a vision quest, um, in curing ceremonies, draped over altars, wrapped around tombstones, folded and placed on coffins, a form of identity, and showing your belief systems, gift giving, naming ceremonies, graduation ceremonies. Like, one of them in here, I forgot which to write down which page it was, but one like Indian high school, the school would
Yes.
purchase a star quilt for each
Uh-huh.
student. Now, the first thing I thought of was, well, how much are those artists getting paid? But that's another story. But they would literally purchase one for each student as they're graduating. I'm sure their graduating
And
classes are significantly smaller, but you know,
and sometimes give quilts to the opposing team members for like good sportsmanship.
yeah,
It's like that is amazing.
yeah. So when I think about it, well, so there's two things. One, there is a reference in here further back. Let me see, did I write it down? It's um it is it was in relation to the Hawaiian quilts, but this really kind of counts for all quilts. Where it says like Hawaiian quilters believe that finished quilts are imbued with the maker's spirit. And
Hmm.
we kind of hear that throughout all cultures of quilt making, where kind of there's a little
Right,
bit of
yeah.
you in that quilt. So when I was thinking about how important specifically these star quilts
Mhm.
are, and how they're seen as uh these great mementos for all these very symbolic things in life and passages of time and space,
Hmm.
I could see that the same thing, where each star quilt you have, you're kind of collecting people. There's a reference later about how the person with no star quilts is a very poor person, because
Yes.
it means like
Uh-huh.
no one cared about you. And it really got me thinking, I didn't see anything, you tell me otherwise, about signing them. If you're collecting kind of all these people, are there, I'm sure the person that originally gets the quilts probably remembers each person and each reason, but once
Hmm.
that person passes, there might not be someone left to remember those. So like,
Right, yeah.
is there a tradition of signing them? I haven't seen a mention of that yet.
Yeah, I didn't see anything mentioned. The only thing I saw about like any kind of information on a quilt were the Hawaiian quilts
Hmm.
where they might put the traditional name of the design and like the English name or
Hmm.
whatever they've called the quilt. But yeah, that's the only thing I saw. So, yeah, I mean these quilts could really represent such, it's not just like, my grandma made a quilt and I got it, when
No,
she passed away,
I
but
was thinking like when someone
there's
dies,
yeah, there's quite a
like,
bit of provenance going on with these
yeah, like,
quilts.
well, let's say someone dies that lived a long life, and I'm thinking like, wow, based on all these reasons you might give a star quilt or receive one, this person could have upwards of, let's say, 50 star quilts. They
Yeah.
could have, it could be
Mm.
literally like a snapshot photo album of all the milestones of their life.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
wouldn't that be the most interesting funeral you've ever gone to if it was like a quilt exhibit of like And this is the star quilt they received from whoever on their naming ceremony, and then this one on their whatever the next thing was, and this one on the blah 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 blah. And then like seeing all this, the I've got goosebumps, all the differences, kind of, because they're not gonna all look the same, that's for sure.
No.
That would be so amazing. I wonder if that's a thing. Maybe we should ask Michigan State University, since they have so many
Yeah,
of these
yeah.
quilts.
Well, I mean, there is the picture, and I'm jumping ahead here, but on page 50 of I guess this is a gentleman lying in state,
Oh yeah.
surrounded by prized possessions, and there's a quilt in there. So, I mean, I guess
I
that's a
was
possibility. But
also
this is specific to, as he
I was
seeing
also
it.
thinking about this one too on 41, and this is the earliest photograph showing the use of a star quilt in
Yeah.
McCoy life in 1891. This is a portrait of Chief Red Cloud at his home in Pine Ridge, South Dakota.
Mm-hmm.
Is that picking up at all?
Yeah, I can only see the corner of the picture though. You have to move it down to the other way. Other way. There you go. Um, yeah, that is such a cool picture. And, um, so a couple other things I noted on page 44, when so Marietta Forbear, when they talking about like, you don't keep quilts for yourself, you give them away. And, she talks about her grandchildren, the only time I get to use a star quilt is when I come to visit them.
Mm-hmm.
And, they wrap themselves in their quilts and they wrap me in their quilt. I'm like, oh, I love that. And then down further where Barbara Teselar, she talks about her grandmother on her, I mean, almost dying, and the doctor comes and she's like, yeah, get this old tied quilt off and we got to put the just for nice one on the bed. It's like, oh my gosh. If I was sick and the doctor was coming to see me, I really would not care. But the pride of, ownership there and these beautiful quilts.
Mm-hmm.
Jen said she would totally play a team sport if she thought they were going to give her a quilt.
Right?
Same. I might not have quit field hockey in high school had I known I was going to get a quilt. Um, So all the pictures on pages 46 and 47, I
Mm-hmm.
love, poring over them. The ice fishing guy with the quilt wrapped around the little ice
Mm-hmm.
fishing. I thought that was so cute. And then, oh my gosh, the baby in the swing. Um, like this is one of those postcards, right? Uh, these very offensive, yeah, these very offensive postcards. I'm a Potawatomi baby. Look at me.
Mm-hmm.
But also, how brilliant, to make a swing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking the baby swing was such a lifesaver when my child was very small, and I'm thinking, is this where the idea of baby swings came from? Obviously, yes.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, brilliant. But to just have, you got a rope or some twine or whatever, and you just rig up the quilt, and there you go.
You
I
just
love that.
mentioned the playing, Jen playing a sport, and giving away quilts to your opponents and things. Like,
Mhm.
I, I would have never thought of star quilts in this way.
I know, and it's brilliant. And and the baseball one, the diamonds are literally bisected to
Mm-hmm.
create, the baseball and then the red points around it. Um,
The one on
okay.
the star quilt on 55
Mhm.
is out of the planning again. Like, wow, out of this
Yes.
world.
Hmm.
Like when it's one of those things again, when we're having that argument of our quilts art or craft, I'd have a real hard time looking at something like this and be like, no, they can only be craft. Go sit in the corner.
Yeah.
Like, really?
Yeah. I think that's another brilliant one. I also had it flagged. Now I'm in love with these, and I am starting to think like, from a non community symbol level, just from a novelty idea, like what else could you put into?
Hmm.
I was just thinking like along those lines. Um, if we can jump back to pages 48 and 49, the little papoose, the little carrier, the baby wrap. Oh,
Hmm.
so cute. Um, and this is where I think you were referring to, that quilts represent an investment of time, thought, and self. That's at the
Hmm.
bottom of page 48. And then on 49, right in the middle, it says, by making quilts and giving them away, it's almost like giving away part of yourself.
Hmm.
And I mean, what quilter doesn't believe that?
Right.
You don't just slap something together and say like, yeah, here's a blanket. It's I've made this quilt with you in mind, when you gift a quilt to somebody. So on the idea of giving away the quilts, the dispersing of quilts as like literally like a thing, you know, like it's not just, oh, you know, birth, death, like naming ceremony, all that kind of stuff, but literally like we're gonna have a giveaway at this
Yeah.
event we're planning for, and the idea 300 guests and giving away up to 100 quilts. And I love that they mention that these large giveaways, they can even purchase quilts from other tribes. And I would imagine like if your community is coming up on something that's big like this, and your quilters may be overwhelmed, that it's interesting that they would reach out to, other communities to purchase quilts
Hmm.
for their event.
Hmm.
I thought that was really interesting.
And it's funny because on page 51, there's a mention of a Pequot tribe in
Hmm.
Hartford, Connecticut. It's not the same Pequot tribe that I worked with. There's more than one Pequot tribe, but it's not far. During their powwow, it included more than 50 quilts, most made by Skoi quilters. I was like, wow. The tribe, as far as I know, the tribe that I worked with, I was not personally aware of any quilt tradition within them. But again, I spent a very small amount of time with them working on a very specific project. So
And you weren't into quilts yet, were
I
you?
was not, but when I looked back at the pictures, I do have photos. We can look at them on one of the streams if you guys want. There is some very funny ones. Um, I do have pictures of their powwow, and I did not see any quilts. Um, but and again, I have like no recollection. I could reach out to that professor who's worked with them for like 20 years and ask him if they have
Oh, that
uh
would be interesting.
any quilt
Yeah.
tradition. But I just found that funny that this was I'm wondering if this is a because if I know of the Eastern Pequot, that's the group I worked with, and I'm wondering if potentially this is like the Mashantucket Pequot, which was originally all one tribe, and then there was like this like insane split at one point.
Hmm.
It's such a tragic story, I can't even talk about it. But um I'm gonna have to like look and see like what
Yeah,
this is.
yeah, it would be interesting to circle back and find out.
Hmm.
Um, so jumping ahead to page 56 and 57, quilts as pictorial stories. I love the quilt with Coyote,
Oh yeah.
because
I
I'm
wish there
like,
was a bigger
oh,
picture.
I know, because I was like, I had my nose pressed up to it, but I have heard this story about, Coyote creating the night sky, but
Yeah.
if you look at him, it's like he's wearing jeans and a fringe jacket. He's
Yeah.
like all like, modern guy. I just thought that was so cute. Um,
No, and
and
pictorially,
mhm,
and I know we're dealing with cultures here that are very heavily steeped in oral tradition and
mhm,
storytelling. But what a great another level to add um in engaging another sense, because if it's orally, you have to come up with the imagery yourself, and this way the person telling or the person making the quill, however that works, maybe they're the same person, I don't know, maybe they're not, but it helps guide the viewer, the listener, into a particular path of engaging with that story. I'm getting a little
yeah.
academic, sorry.
No, I absolutely. And I mean, like, I mean, we kind of talked about this a little bit with, like African American story quilts. You
Mm-hmm.
have folks who may not have been able to read and write. And so
Mm-hmm.
they're, or were not allowed to read and write. And so, much of their tradition was also oral for that reason,
Mm-hmm.
because either they were not given, they didn't have access to education, or they were prohibited from learning or using those skills. And um I mean, it's there. I think there's so, when you look at pictorial quilts, there's symbolism, there's like just the outright, like, you obviously know what's going on. It's very literal.
Mm-hmm.
Um yeah, and I've always loved pictorial quilts. My you know my naive sensibilities are kind of like the children's ones. Those are the ones that I'm like initially really attracted to, because they're just so, they're cute, they're precious. But in looking at, again, oral traditions and being able to translate that into pictorial stuff, it's a very cool thing. And it's more enduring than on paper. A
Mm-hmm.
quilt is more enduring.
I mean, just because they're everywhere, I have to jump back to a star quilt real quick because, like, look at that.
I know, that's another really neat one. And in this case, she did that, like, the piece at the top is those two little small, uh I don't know, blades of the star,
Mm-hmm.
up there in the middle of that um device at the top. I mean, because it's not, I guess the two larger pieces on the side are the same as the ones below, the arms of the star, but those two little ones at the top are not. So yeah, I mean, it just, again, it's the skill of planning this.
Mm-hmm. I
Um,
also, just because we're nearing 9 o'clock here, I want to make sure
mhm.
that I bring up on page 61, how, we had some of these, tribes getting involved in things like, um in the first paragraph here under government programs in quilt making, we have two people studied home economics in college and were asked to
Mhm.
teach and set up a quilt making factory in Pine Ridge, South Dakota, as part of a 1930s Works Progress Administration WPA
Yeah.
project.
Yep.
Another
I
one of
loved
those
reading about that.
scenarios where topics just seem to follow into every little thing you
Right.
do next. Because
Yeah,
where did we read
exactly.
that? Mary Kay Walvogel's book.
Hmm. Yep. And in this same area, I had highlighted the fact that the Bureau of Indian Affairs issued quilt making instruction books.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd be really curious to know, like, I mean, if that's something that we can find, because I'd be
I
curious
don't
to
see
know,
why you
like,
wouldn't.
yeah, what those look like. So yeah, I made a note to myself to see if I could do some research on that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and kind of along the same lines of the Bureau of Indian Affairs on page 63, where they talk about that first paragraph. This is the 30s, and we're talking about copyright protections for the
Mm-hmm.
women. Like, that's unheard of,
Yep.
not just women. You're talking about Indian women
Mm-hmm.
who ostensibly have far fewer rights than just your average white woman,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, I just, that shocked me that, this was something that, that they would have been going after.
No, and
Yeah.
I'm so glad to find out that they were.
Yeah, yeah. I
That
mean,
they
well,
were
yeah, you're like, well,
successful.
somebody was on the right side of history.
Yep.
You know?
Because, yeah, down, the paragraph underneath there, like, concerns about appropriation of native designs by other cultures continue to be an issue today. Oh boy, do they ever.
Hmm. Yeah. Um, I don't know. We probably don't want to talk about the Tula Pink scandal, do we? I don't know if
Probably not.
I, I don't know if everybody in our space actually knows about that, because I know, some of our quilt nerd friends are maybe not modern quilters, and so they may not know about that. But yes, famous quilt fabric designer Tula Pink ran afoul of some native communities when she tried to create some fabric that had some imagery that people found contrary and offensive to their deeply held beliefs. So things like headdresses on, headdress imagery that would have been kind of offensive. The headdresses would not be used that way. Women don't wear the headdresses, things like that. So there was quite a kerfuffle, and that was, I think it was like 2015,
Yeah, that was a while ago.
2016. Yeah. Yeah. On page 64, I found this interesting, where, we talked about the sports teams, but this was the school. I'm not going to even try to pronounce it because I know I'll butcher it, but it's on the Mohawk Reservation. And it said that they were using the quilts as fundraisers. And it says at first just a few parents and community members provided the quilts, but soon all parents with children enrolled in the school had to participate in the auction, either by making a quilt or buying one.
Hmm.
Like, can you imagine? Like today, it's hard. Like, I mean, my son is in his late 20s, but when he was in elementary school, it was always like you had to really push and prod people to get them to bring something for the bake sale or
Yeah.
the grade level picnic or whatever. My God, can you imagine being like, you're either gonna have to make a quilt or buy one for our fundraiser?
Hmm.
I mean, that is wild to me.
I also just at the top of 64 here, this picture of them around one of those quilting frames that hangs from the ceiling.
Yes, yes, I know.
Something about old photos of people with quilts and quilting
Hmm.
and things. They make me feel the warm and fuzzies.
Yeah, for sure. Also in 66, of course, you saw the Sioux, right? The
Mm-hmm.
sunbonnet. She's in the back of that pickup truck, and I guess there's a whole bunch of like pillows and things. And I didn't quite understand what an elderly parade is. Is it a parade of your elders? Is it just you free the old people from the old folks home for the day? Like, I'm not sure. But yeah, I loved that picture. Um, so And then I don't think I had anything else highlighted here. Um, but I think the next section we start reading for next week, but on the kind of last page, you've got the two Hawaiian quilts, the Hawaiian flag quilt. This is a new version of it, but it is a very, very ubiquitous imagery of the flags.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like there's one or two Hawaiian quilts that are sort of similar to this that kind of
Mm-hmm.
have the figures and the flags, and it's like they show up everywhere when you see things about Hawaiian quilts. Um, and I mean it's great, but I think that the native Hawaiian quilts, that use the tradition of the folded paper are like really the showstoppers.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Harriet Sung, her quilts. I mean, she is an amazing quilter. I mean, this was 97. I wonder if she doesn't look like she's terribly old in this picture, so maybe she's still around and making quilts.
You should look her up too, add her to your list.
Yeah, on my extra research time.
Yeah. Well, luckily
So,
we kept it to about our hour tonight.
yeah, we did pretty good. So you want to remind everybody of what our next reading is?
Yes, for the 29th. Oh my God, October's like over.
No.
Oh, and by the
There.
way, Jen just said she would be great for Baltimore Applique Society.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah, for the 29th, we're gonna do pages 68 through 101. And don't be scared. I always count how many pages of actual reading it is.
Lots of pictures. All good.
Yep, and then make sure you're keeping an eye on like social media and stuff because Steph and I have a lot of back content, exhibits and all kinds of things. If you recall, we are not doing another book after this for the year. This is our last book for the year, which I looked back, by the way, and this actually makes book number 10. We will have read
Wow.
10 books this year. Isn't that insane?
Yeah, and we enjoyed 90% of them.
That's true. That's true. Um,
10 books makes it for good math.
and you know what's funny? If I had just been reading, oh, Jennifer just said Harriet passed in 2012. Boy,
Aw.
she the quick draw there.
Well, thank you for looking that up, but that's a bummer. She was very talented.
Mm. Um, I wouldn't, if I was on my own, I don't think I ever would have read 10 of these books in a year. I don't think I ever would have stayed motivated. Like the nice thing here is that this is kind of our um accountability group,
Hmm.
to keep us going. But I mean, we're not just reading, like we're also discussing and making connections, not only between topics, but between books and authors and algorithms, and things like that. So yeah, so we
Yeah.
aren't picking another book for this year. We're not done reading, don't worry. Like there will be more books. We're just gonna the holiday months of November and December are so busy, so we figured we'd just do shows that don't require everyone else to do homework, just us.
Yeah.
So we're
And
also
we
gonna,
have a little backlog of homework, so
yeah. So, and we have our anniversary already, our 1 year anniversary
yeah.
in November, so that's a big deal. So keep your eye out. I do have to make a new schedule for us for November, by the way, but in case we get a wild hair and maybe we add a stream one day to look at some stuff or do something special, or just keep an eye out. And that's not even to say maybe I do something special without Steph because she's tired and I need to do something.
You never know what's going to happen. As we always say, it's live internet. You never
Yeah,
know what's going to happen.
that's true. I have unboxing things to look at, and you know, there's only some few hundred quilts here. There's all kinds of things. Make sure you're always
Well,
watching.
I think that it's probably time for you to get some rest because you're
Sounding really
got
nasal.
some stuff going on. Yeah, your doctor gave you some of the good drugs to help
Yes.
you sleep with this
Yes.
whatever you got going on with your sinuses.
I'm very
And
excited.
knock on wood, that cake didn't get it.
Yeah.
I was in close proximity with you all weekend. So,
Yeah, that's true.
and on a lighter note, I will be going to a quilt study tomorrow.
Lucky.
So I will report back on Thursday. And yeah, I also have hopefully something cool coming this week that I can do on Thursday. We'll see. It's whether the mail UPS and the mail are behaving. So,
Well, that'll be very exciting.
hey Arlene. Arlene says feel better.
Thanks,
So yes.
Arlene. Just hope it doesn't get any worse.
Yes, feel better, and also hope you didn't give it to me because it doesn't matter if you feel better because I'll choke you for making me sick.
Well, on that note,
Yeah.
good
Well,
night, everybody.
see you soon, guys. We'll see you next week or Thursday if you join me on my stream.
Go Thursday. I'll be there because I won't be feeling good. Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.